jet black faces once walked the earth all alone, no other races, until he traveled to the other lands colder than the motherland, and then the cross began. That's when the frost began, the pigment loss began. The further north this man traveled as he crossed new land. The man in the ice who once walked in the sand, soon he began to lose his
tan. This is a figure, a sculpture that was found
yet on the inside.
And one of the things that they have
he was still
discovered is that many of the sculptures of early Europe show various African types. In fact, 55,000 years ago, according to 3 labs, the University of Oxford, the University of Hawaii, the University of California at Berkeley have come to the conclusion that there are no people on the earth 55,000 years ago who are not black Africans.
One thing that is indubitably clear is that Africa is the cradle of the entire human race. From 4 million years ago all the way up to 200,000 years ago, the stepwise sequence leading in an evolutionary progression from early pre-human hominid ancestors all the way up to modern human beings occurred in Africa and Africa alone. Not that there weren't any migrations out of Africa, but those migrations did not have any impact on human evolutions leading up to modern human beings until after our human beings in fact left Africa. Now what do I mean by that? A man by the name of Wainscott from England has said is that all of the populations around the globe are descendants from small founder populations that left Africa probably no later than 100,000 years ago. This means that, as C.W. Stringer has said, that all 6.5 billion people on this planet are Africans under the skin. Because if we go back far enough, everyone has
Africans with jet black faces once walked the earth all alone, no other races, until he traveled to the other lands colder than the motherland, and then the cross began.
Theority or inferiority. And so for approximately how many years was the world populated exclusively and only by Africans, black Africans? Okay, black skin. If you're talking about the modern, the last African, okay, because you see, the African is not only the first hominid, he's also the first human. Okay, the hominid is not completely human like us, but then comes the first human with our brain case, that's also African. And this begins to change about 55,000 years ago in Europe, where you get Africoid types becoming Caucasoid types.
Once again, this woman would have been how old now?
250,000 years old. Now, just by way of comparison, the oldest Homo sapiens sapiens bones that we find in Europe are 50,000, about 40,000 to 50,000 years old. This is the Grimaldi skeletons that were found in the Grimaldi cave.
So you have the African, how long ago now?
You have the African at least 200,000 years before they moved to the European continent.
And the European comes on the scene when?
Well, the African comes on the scene in Europe approximately 50,000 years ago. In other words, the first European was an African too, and is still an African. It's just an African who has changed.
And once again, what happened to that African once he got to Europe?
Well, you had several ice ages that and a change in environment, and the theory is that the change in environment, and especially the ice age part of it, being cut off from the African continent, having a completely different environment with respect to diet and climate and all those things, resulted over a 20,000 year period in physical changes, genetic mutations to adapt to that particular environment. And about about 20,000 years or so ago, we have changes sufficient that we look and see distinct people when they really aren't distinct in that sense, in the sense of having groups that can't interbreed. That's what one of the biological definitions of race is, that groups can't, you know, a dog and a cow can't have offspring, so they would be different strains, but varieties of the same family, so that the European that resulted was merely a depigmented African.
All of us are, all of us are, all of us are, all of us are.
How do we prove that Africa is African? No one asks the question, how do we prove Europe is European? You know, so that question in and of itself speaks to problems that exist within this society. So we look at the people who lived during that period of time. We look at what they wrote about themselves, what they wrote about their ancestors. And what we know beyond a shadow of a doubt by looking at the research at Nabta Playa, which is the site of the oldest astroarchaeological calendar in existence. It is a calendar that dates to a specific understanding of the cosmos and its effect on the people who lived in that region of the world. That calendar has been dated back to at least 7,000 BC, 3,000 years older than Stonehenge. And Tauseti is where Europeans who were digging in Upper Kemet in preparation for the completion of the Aswan Dam. I knew that that entire region of Egypt was going to be flooded under 50 feet of water stretching back 350 miles. So they went in a last-ditch effort to access materials before it would be lost forever. There was a team of archaeologists from the Oriental Museum in Chicago, affiliated with the University of Chicago. They did the excavations, and they sat on that information for 10 years.
Decades ago, there was a study by Keith Seal going into the northern part of what we today call Sudan. He had a student by the name of Dr. Bruce Williams.
It was Keith Seal, who was the head of that mission, who sat on that information, and then when he died in an automobile accident, one of his assistants, Bruce Williams, finally began to release that information. And Tauseti, in a New York Times publication, referenced Tauseti as the oldest city ever discovered. And in Cusco, they found a cemetery, a tomb in a cemetery in Cusco, where there was this incense burner.
And this tour group, this study group, this archaeological group came upon an incense burner that was found in L14 area of the northern part of Nubia, in an area known as Kustal.
And that incense burner is now on display in the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago. On that incense burner are images that depict fundamental elements that would be an integral part of civilization in Kemet.
It was a very important area because it predated the first dynasty by, give or take, anywhere between 15 and 20 generations.
Finding O'Driscoll. But not all Africans came to Europe as raiders. Some came as conquerors. We'll call that the royal wave of African migration. And to discuss this migration, we have to specifically talk about the Moors and the Berbers. There are no two people more qualified to discuss those topics than Dr. Ivan van Sertima and Dr. John Henrik Clark. Who then were the Moors, and why did the Portuguese and Spanish hate them so much?
Well, the Moors controlled Spain and Portugal, but the Portuguese freed themselves from the domination in 1240. They hated them because they were foreigners who were ruling over them.
Were the Moors Arab or black?
They were a mixture, but mainly black. The word Moor came into the language meaning blackamoor.
Ah.
And when the English speak of marshlands or dark places, they speak of it today as the Moors.
In other words, the negative connotation came from domination.
Yes.
Okay.
But the Moors introduced a lot of things into Spain. They gave Spain the greatest material culture it ever had before.
Were the Moors basically out of that Moroccan area, or were they from further
No, they're
south?
out of the Senegambia area and out of the area now marked on the map as Mauritania.
Okay.
And they were descended. LeBlanc and Halle Bourguiba's book on the Moors and on the conquest, she says the army was as black as ink. The general was blacker still. What made the general seem to be blacker than the rest? He was the only one riding a white horse.
On the end. It's as late as the 17th century.
He said that, you know, he became more alert and more human being. He became more, you see, Malone became a more human being. Not just human being, you became a more yourself. You achieve your destiny when you go to Kemet school. You became a human being, more human. We are a human being already, but more human being. That means more wise. And when you go to Kemet school, when Plato himself compare what they do in Kemet school, I give Greek because it will be no debate. You see, it's our school in Greece, the way we are doing things is just for creatures like pigs. You see, like pigs. You see, and he say myself, I'm ashamed. Myself as a Plato, I'm ashamed. We do things like that is a shame. And also not only for myself, for all Greek, the Greek world is a shame. What we can do, our education, when you compare with Kemet, is not even for human beings, it's just for pigs, for animals.
Ancient Egyptian. Logic, arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and music, what we call the 7 liberal arts. This was the educational system that was in place at the time that Greek people came to Kemet.
Now go back and show who the people were that established this.
Okay, the people, the
images you showed earlier.
Okay, the images that we're showing are these people. See, now I just skipped back to the 12th dynasty, but in this dynasty, these people were teaching trigonometry. In other words, we have papyri with math problems on them, the Rhine papyrus, the Moscow papyrus, with problems on them. These papyri were written in the 12th dynasty, and they had problems not only in geometry, but also in trigonometry. That just gives you an example of how much, how highly developed mathematics to the world.
All right.
Put my glasses on and actually read this a little bit. Yes. Problem number 56 in the Rin mathematical papyrus, that's the one you see up there, seeks to find the slope of a pyramid whose height is 250 cubits and whose base is 360 cubits. The answer is 5 1/25 palms for each cubit in height, representing the cotangent of the angle of the slope of the pyramid's face. Now, if you've got a cotangent, if you can find cotangents, you know the way you can find tangents is that you flip the cotangent over. It's the inverse of a tangent. The other thing too, just look at that. Imagine that that pyramid is three-dimensional, because that's what it's supposed to be. Now, all you really have to do is inscribe a triangle inside that pyramid. A right triangle whose height is also the same as the height of the pyramid. Therefore, the face becomes the hypotenuse. And half of the pyramid's base becomes the base of that right triangle, and then the height of the pyramid becomes the height of the right triangle. When you have all that in place, and it's really just a matter of drawing it in, you then can find sine and cosine. So now, if they have the tangent and cotangent and the ability to find sine and cosine, by definition, they have trigonometry. We find in the Rind mathematical papyrus, we find formulas for the area of the rectangle, which is problem number 6. This is the Rind mathematical papyrus. There are, I think, 4 mathematical papyri that have been discovered. One is the Moscow mathematical papyrus, showing you the area of a rectangle, or the formula for obtaining the area of a rectangle. A equals L times B. This is problem number 14 of the Moscow papyrus. This is the formula for finding the volume of a truncated pyramid. Now, the volume for a truncated pyramid gives you volume equals height, 1/3 the height, times a squared ab plus b squared. This is actually more difficult than finding the volume of the total pyramid. So if they could, check on the job says, he who can do more can do less. So if they can find the volume of the truncated pyramid, they also knew the volume of the pyramid, how to find the volume of the pyramid. 1/3 the height times area squared. This is problem number 56, also from the Rind mathematical papyrus. This is a problem that allows them to demonstrate how to find the slope of the pyramid. And in this problem, they actually deal with cotangents, showing that they had also not only begun their studies in geometry, but also in trigonometry as well. Among these ancient people of the Nile, these ancient black peoples of the Nile, we find the first evidence of algebra, because in the Rind mathematical papyruses, number 24 to 27, are algebraic equations of the first degree. They also handled algebraic equations of the second degree. Algebra is basically, if you have to strip it down to its essentials, its ability to solve problems when you have an unknown. Now, we call that unknown usually x or y. The ancient Kamites used to call it a quantity.